Hello, this is Stephen with AI Culture, where I talk with scholars about different aspects of the social side of AI. Today, I'm talking with a Navajo software engineer and AI activist. So we're going to be talking about how all this AI stuff has been impacting Native American communities in the United States, particularly those in Arizona. So she's going to be talking about a lot, ranging from building data centers in native lands and how different people in the community think about that, to the cultural accessibility and how these technologies relate or interact with native culture. So it's an interesting conversation, and I hope you enjoy. And in case you're wondering, I'm currently in Cebu in the Philippines while I film this. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Chamisa Edmo. Chamisa, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah. So you're currently a PhD student, and you have also done a lot of, you're currently a PhD student in computer science, and you have also done a lot of work in AI, and you've done a lot of work around with different native communities or different indigenous communities in the United States
Mhm.
around AI. Do you want to maybe give a quick summary about what you do?
Yeah. And actually, before I do that, I'd like to kind of like introduce myself and situate myself in the conversation, like who I am, who I'm bringing with me. So I'm Yata Chamisa Edmo Yanishia. I'm Chamisa. I'm Navajo, born for Blackfeet and Shoshone Bannock. Yeah. As you said, I'm currently in Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, at the University of Kansas, working toward my PhD in computer science. My family home, the places I come from, Albuquerque, New Mexico area is home for me. So I bring all of those relations into the work I do, and those communities that I come from all guide me, including Haskell here in Lawrence, guide me in the work that I'm doing. So as far as a summary, that's I think it's a big question. I work in understanding AI. I think first and foremost, I'm a science communicator. So as much work as I can do to break down really complex topics in ways that are useful for our communities, I don't think that we have a whole lot of information that's easily digestible and applicable or relevant to the conversations that we need to be having in community. So I do that. I also find ways to make that easier and more accessible for youth, for community members, for universities even. I think for the most part, everybody's swimming in the deep end with AI and data systems and things like that. So I use my nerdy skills to break some of that down, some of that complexity down. In my research world, I'm looking at artificial intelligence, AI systems, and data systems, and trying to understand how we can formally verify and create safe systems for our communities that look really different from kind of the mainstream expectation of what AI is, and we're being marketed for what AI is going to be and could be. I think the possibilities that exist in our communities are much, much different, and there are far more possibilities for the things that we need and the ways that we might apply the technology. So figuring out how we can do that in safe ways with formal verification and understanding, like how we can create less extractive data systems is where that research is living right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think this is very important work. And these are big, important questions. I guess maybe that's a good place to start. I guess how do you think about of the different kind of big questions you mentioned? I mean, the first one that stood out to me was data extraction. We can go down a different one if you want to start with that one. But how do you how do you think about how do you think we might improve that? And maybe also, what do you see as some of the kind of the biggest problems around data extraction?
Yeah, I'll start with problems.
That makes a lot more sense because the solutions might not make sense unless you talk about the problems. Yeah.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, I think I say that because there's a huge movement happening currently, and just kind of grounding in some of that. So typically speaking and historically speaking, data's always been a resource, and like a mined resource, essentially, knowledge and data and all of that. So that's been a long history in our communities already. Even going back to like early anthropological explorations in our communities, just speaking specifically for North America. Coming in, recording, taking those recordings back to museums, things like that. Our knowledge has always kind of been commodified in that way. So that, and then fast forward a little bit further, genomic testing and data and blood sampling, things like that. Once that data leaves our communities, we essentially don't have any, or historically haven't had any process for knowing what's happening with the data, where it's going, who those people are, because there's no relationship or accountability or connection to the future or longevity of that information, that research, things like that. So fast forward a little even further, Indigenous communities are some of the, if you want, the most researched kind of group of people, especially in the United States. So knowing how research kind of plays into our understanding of the world and our understandings of ourselves and our futures is where that extractive piece is super important. So I guess zooming out from that, relational accountability, data sovereignty is this movement that's come from that history and the acknowledgement of that history, and kind of the problem solving around how do we do this better. And there, in the past, I'd say, what year is it? Maybe 30 years or so, my lifetime, research has really shifted toward trying to find ways that we can support community through research, but not in ways that the research doesn't ever necessarily leave the community and it continues to benefit long term. So the data sovereignty movement, Indigenous data sovereignty movement specifically, has come up. There's a whole generation of scholars that are working on this and working in the space now. And very recently, a lot of that has kind of shifted toward, especially with all this conversation around AI, I think it's accelerated a lot of this data conversation and highlighted and elevated it. We're trying to understand now how we can implement that and create governance solutions in our communities around what research looks like, what technology potentially looks like in community, and how we can do things solely for the benefit of community, while also kind of maintaining control and accountability and the usefulness of data for our communities, by our communities. So when we're talking about extractive systems, systems that benefit community and are grounded in community and are driven by community values and need or questions that community may have, that's more of a Indigenous data sovereign kind of project or tool versus coming in and taking and then saying, okay, we're going to give you your language back for $9.99 a month, and you can subscribe at a discounted rate, use this code. So instead of creating systems that will commodify our knowledge and specifically in AI systems, commodify our knowledge and then kind of like sell it back to us, that's where that kind of like balance is. How do we do this for the benefit of community? And there are lots of ways to approach that, but yeah, so that has been historically the problem. And that's kind of where my research questions started. I got into AI, and from there just had a lot of questions around like, oh, well, now that I'm giving this system, or now that I'm using this tool, what is actually happening with that information, and where is that going? And what am I giving away for free without even really like thinking about it? And so being like a critical user of technology has been part of the conversation, and I bring that to curriculum and projects that I do, and then also like how we're ensuring on like the development side and the design side that we're building things that are safe and responsible to community as well.
Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, I think understanding the wider context with data is very helpful, because, like you said, there's a whole history here around selective data or selective control over data, including specifically for Native peoples in what is now the United States. I guess my question for you is, what do you think is different with AI? So like you mentioned that AI has kind of revamped these conversations and has kind of caused them to become even bigger, like kind of blown up these conversations. What do you think is different in and maybe nothing's different and it just is the next thing in this kind of wider history, but do you think there are things that are different about AI, and either in terms of the problem that it creates, but also in terms of like what we can do to better make sure that the community, that what's being built is being built by the community and is useful to the community, as opposed to just being a product to the community. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'll answer the first one first, and then get into maybe the second one. So what's different now, I think, and especially since the pandemic, is I think technology was kind of like this sort of like unspoken network and like backbone of communication, previous to like all of us being at home in the living room, kind of like quarantined and finding ways that we can connect with like technology being that intermediary. So I think the shift through the pandemic and then post-pandemic for our relationship to technology broadly as just like human beings on the planet really created more of an opportunity for people to familiarize themselves with technology that may not have been familiar previously, and also just kind of like build our understanding about what tools are available. Alongside that, I think that AI is really in and has been for a while, kind of this like exponential acceleration around how well tools are performing and what tools are available, what techniques are being used to make things faster, more efficient, to use LLMs specifically, or any kind of AI technology, because AI has been around since essentially like the 50s. That's in 1954 is when it was coined, so it's been a thing for a very long time. But I think computation and like kind of this perfect storm, so to say, of conditions created this opportunity for AI right now to be sort of accelerating. So that was already happening, but pandemic, and then since then, I think we're seeing physical artifacts being created around like this acceleration. That's like data centers, that's constant marketing around the new, biggest, best, fastest AI tool. And so all of those factors, I think, are what are making right now a really unique time in history, where we're all seeing and using and interfacing at some level with AI, and we, broadly speaking, don't necessarily know what that AI is. So there's a lot of curiosity around it, and a lot of misinformation and confusion, and like lots of people trying to explain it, but with corporate interests in mind, things like that. So I think that curiosity mixed with like a ubiquity of and like ease of access for tools is what has driven a lot of that popular conversation. And then yeah, what we do with all that information, like, I guess, like, I think people are becoming more critical users of technology just generally. You see a big data center and you're like, oh my gosh, what are we even storing there? It's just a big warehouse of computers, but understanding how all of that interfaces physically with our actual communities, and the extractive nature of that in the context of this like global climate crisis that we're in and continue to be in, and continue to accelerate with these tools. Yeah, how are we navigating that responsibly? And I don't think that we're seeing very responsible navigation from just the big tech kind of side of things. So I think that's what's driving right now. Those are some of the problems and what's driving right now the conversation around AI and technology and data and extraction and things like that. I think your second question was about solutions, right?
Yes, and I guess I was thinking specifically solutions in your experience for Native communities, in terms of building stuff that is useful and connects and is maybe on some level built by them, as opposed to being a product that they have to buy. Like, here's the language, here's your language back to you. Alternatives to that kind of thing. Yeah, I think so. From that conversation, just kind of broadly, like everybody being a little bit more curious about AI, I think that we don't necessarily have solutions yet, but we're seeing I think there's more of an urgency in community, and I've seen that in the last probably like 5 years, because everybody is so much more familiar with AI and like using AI, and there's lots of popular conversation around it. I think that now communities are like, oh shoot, like what do we do about this? What like we don't want this massive 40-acre data center in our backyard. So I think that right now we're in a little bit of a tension point with what we're seeing happening, and what kind of like the limited like scope of possibilities are from a corporate standpoint. And that's where I think that a lot of my work kind of exists, is communicating like, yes, that's happening, and yes, like I agree, we need to figure out how to assert treaty rights, water rights, things like that, whatever we can, in order to further, I guess, sustain our tribal sovereignty, specifically here in the U.S. And then also, like, how do we like determine on our own terms what this future could look like, and what are our actual needs around technology and AI, because there's a lot smaller scale way to do a lot of this, and that's where I think a lot of the science communication comes in. But I don't know that any community, bless you, I don't know that any community
necessarily have a solution yet. I think there are a number of communities that are beginning to explore some of the like economic trade-offs for getting into like data centers or creating data centers, things like that. Specifically for AI, some communities have already been exploring what AI looks like with regard to cultural knowledge, language, things like that. So I think that we're a little bit all over the map as far as what we're trying to figure out and solve. But yeah, again, that's where a lot of my research and the work I'm doing currently at KU is kind of coming in, is to help navigate and create conversations around what our futures could look like for ourselves.
Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, the technology's has had a recent explosion. So some of the questions, especially around data centers. I mean, data centers have been around for a while, but the need for them has, or not the need, the perceived demand for them has skyrocketed. So I could definitely see, like we're communities kind of new, like first starting the process of thinking about it, and then being like, okay, how do we actually respond effectively? Quick specific question for the native communities that are thinking about setting up data centers. Are they primarily is what they're considering primarily to set up data centers for like big tech companies to use, or are they primarily, like, say, to rent out, or are they primarily setting up data centers for like they themselves to use in some within the community?
I think both and. I know, and we actually just had a few weeks ago, actually, a really big conference here at KU that we brought leaders from all over the region, Southern Plains and Northern Plains as well, to KU to talk about AI and data sovereignty. And I believe it's Cherokee Nation. There may be a few other communities right now that are kind of like also following similar process, but Cherokee Nation is doing currently conducting a cost-benefit analysis for a data center that would be on tribal lands, and I think in that they're also considering environment and things like that, things that wouldn't typically be kind of like part of the conversation in terms of like the cost. So they're, I believe, the first, if not one of the first tribes that are exploring this. Like, how do you scale this? How do you make this useful for community? And kind of like the context of data sovereignty and data governance. So, because it becomes really complex. Sovereignty is complex already, but in cyberspace, there's no notion of rights or sovereignty, tribal sovereignty specifically, with regard to like user data and things like that. So how you manage those things and create opportunities and pathways and walls and partitions, things like that, to keep things safe and just available to specific communities is like its own unique kind of like infrastructure design question. So yeah, I think I want to say that it'll be useful for communities nearby. I'm not sure where that conversation is currently, but yeah, I think it would be for like companies to use, for communities to use. I think they're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, this makes sense. Okay, so, but that's very interesting. I mean, I guess, I guess all of this kind of shows some of the both the potential issues and potential opportunities that this type of stuff poses, but at the same time, it leads to a lot of questions. Like, and it seems like everything. I mean, I think for many regular people now, I mean, this can feel like a bit of a moving target, because it often feels like things are changing fast, and it's kind of hard to predict both where it's going to go, but also to like make ready-made plans about how to respond when, a year from now, suddenly things feel different. Everything's different. What's in your personal experience, like what's the kind of the pulse on some of the native communities you work with? Like, um, are they mostly like concerned? Are they more optimistic, or are they, um, you know, kind of share a similar spread with, we'll say, other people in the United States about being a mix of kind of hopeful, pessimistic, it's going to take our jobs, it's going to be an environmental problem, or yeah, what kind of things in your experience do you think people have feel both on the optimistic side and on the pessimistic side?
Yeah, I definitely agree that like there's a wide range and a big mix. I think I don't know that I can, yeah, kind of like generalize, but definitely, if I were to choose a tone or kind of like a vibe, it'd be like very maybe like pessimistic curiosity or something like that, cautious curiosity. Um, there, I think communities, and when I say communities, I'm kind of broadly speaking about both like citizens of a community, leadership of that community, and also like kind of how we all work together as like as one big like indigenous monolith, for lack of a better word. But yeah, how what I think is happening now is I think that because there's a lot more information out there, the questions that I'm getting are way more specific, especially in the last like 4 years, or like 3 years, 4 years. The questions I'm getting are like really specific and like use based, which is exciting for me, because that was where previous to that, like the pandemic, like that's where a lot of my conversations kind of had were starting was, well, this is what AI is, and this is what you can do with it, and these are the specific applications. People are already kind of like understanding like, oh, we need to apply certain technologies in certain ways, and AI is a big term for a lot of different things. So I'm already seeing like leadership in communities come to me asking me, like, we have all this data, all this language, like what would be the best way to use this specific tool? How do we implement this in a responsible way? So there are some folks that are trying to use small scale tools, micro tools to help drive some of that, I guess, like information longevity or usefulness of information. However, their communities that they're working with are determining that. And then also on the flip side, there's a much bigger swing around like no AI, no data centers, and so that conversation is more, I think, loudly relevant. But I then kind of drive it back toward, well, that's not the only way. That's, with corporate interests out of the picture, like there are other ways to apply this technology. And yeah, so I think that like the data center conversation is driving a lot of I'd say pessimism, and rightfully so, toward like the attitude generally around AI. But I think for the most part, people are just curious, like, what is this? What is AI? What can we do with it? Should we use it? Should we not use it? Like just trying to understand and like feel through the noise, like find a signal in the noise, like what is the best use case for this technology. And yeah, I think that curiosity makes me hopeful, that we're able to at least have a starting point that we can work from, and how we apply and build tools, and yeah, find solutions for ourselves.
Yeah, this makes sense. One specific thing, I was just kind of thinking about this in the moment, so I didn't put this into the list of questions, but I was thinking about listening to you. I wanted to ask you specifically about language. So, like, I will hear I will hear accounts from ranging from I can try to link to it, but there's a linguistics podcast that did an interview with some people who were like using machine learning to like revitalize languages in indigenous languages in Africa, in certain basically across the continent, but in specific communities and different parts of the continent. And like that was a bit more on the optimistic side. It was a bit more of a these tools can be used to with minimal effort to be able to like interact, like speak a language and then understand a language and then interact with people who are speakers of a language in a way that kind of helps encourage people to learn it and encourages people to use it. And then on the other end, I will, read a decent amount about basically AI being like, it focuses on certain languages, major languages like English or also Chinese, but like languages with a lot of followers or a lot of tech workers, the ones that they speak, and that it kind of a very pessimistic take for how AI might influence language revitalization among different like native or indigenous communities. What's your take?
Yeah, I really like that question. So part of my research is around understanding like systemic injustice, or I guess like how these systems exclude specifically indigenous communities. So just with like the language lens, what we're talking about is high, medium, and low resourcing of languages. So if we consider that all of the AIs everywhere are trained on essentially the same kind of like baseline data from the internet, and most of the internet is in English, and kind of trends toward A, people who have access to internet, B, people who have access to really specific tools that can publish or broker data, kind of like the most. Then we're getting a really, really specific subset of worldview, a really specific subset of language representation that does trend toward most of the major languages. What happens when we're trying to train this tool on a really, really small linguistic data set of a really specific dialect in a very specific region. So linguists know like you kind of get really, really hyper-local with a lot of that. So in this question about how we can use AI to save languages or to come in and train and create tools that create longevity around language, I think that's a good question, but how we go about doing that and what the expectations are of the technology that we're implementing becomes a really kind of like necessary component of the conversation that I think often gets left out. So my research is showing that when you have a low resource language, kind of how it performs in benchmarking, and how you use, or how the, I guess, models use language to answer questions that are really specific in that language. The lower resourced languages, like the more it's omitted out of that data set initially, like kind of like the more hallucinations or the more weird kind of behaviors you'll see throughout how that language is understood, with like air quotes. So I think, yeah, it's really difficult to to train a tool that's never seen a language. You can train a really hyper specific tool that has like a smaller LLM or kind of like a layer on top of that that's specific to a data set, but then you get into some other issues around like just the generalization of it and overfitting and things like that, that you end up learning just the data set that you have, and it doesn't necessarily kind of like create longevity in that use case. I think that there are ways that we can create more hyperlocal tools and really just kind of like limit how, I guess, like where I'm coming from is maybe we don't need a tool that can speak the language forever and always, and maybe we can use tools in really, really specific ways and apply it to have essentially like a same kind of conversation. But as soon as you get into like some of the weirdness, like if we allow models to just kind of like take languages, you get into some territory around like, oh, this model just created a new word for something that doesn't exist, where there's like proper protocol and community process for creating new words, things like that. We don't really want a computer doing that. So how then do you limit systems and what they do and what the outputs are has kind of been where the question has evolved for me.
Yeah, this makes sense. This is super interesting. So just to say it back to make sure I'm understanding this properly, the results that you're finding, that it's in summary basically because the models might be trained on a low amount of the language because because it has a low amount of text, a low sample of the language. It tends to focus pretty heavily on whatever specific like topics or ways of speaking are in those texts it has, and then hallucinate widely with anything beyond that. And it seems like that would, like you would expect, create a lot of problems because it's kind of if it's given anything beyond that narrow frame, it does either weird things, it makes up words, or it kind of represents the language in a strange way. Is that accurate, or am I off in kind of what you are finding?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely accurate. And yeah, like the worldviews and assumptions that go into answering like certain types of questions, like you can see some of those values just missing, or it's answering like, would hypothetical be like, would it be a good idea to build a data center on Java land? It'd probably be like, absolutely yes, without really like considering some of the nuance around the conversation, or even like actual like implications for sovereignty long term. So those are some of those like reasoning layers that I think are left out, especially when you're working with like low resource or unresourced languages that the models have never seen, which I think is where some of the optimism about, oh, this magic bullet can come in and save your language and you'll have this AI speaking it to you for the next 5 generations, where that kind of thing comes in.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this also, in my mind, this connects to multiple sets of issues. I definitely see what you're saying. There's another issue this makes me think about is just how suggestive AI, especially things like chatbots that we might like ask questions to and get responses back. So in the world of language, we're often thinking about chatbots or ChatGPT or stuff like this. But like I previously was I had a previous interview with a scholar. Maybe I'll try to link to it below. But she was talking about human delusions. So like humans who have delusional forms of thinking, and how the chatbots often, because they're super suggestive, kind of lead people on. So like in this example, like this was a big thing she would talk about, like if you ask, is it okay, like would it be a good idea to do anything, chances are it's going to heavily imply yes. Like even in one of her examples, if it was like the particular individual was decided to go try to kill the Queen of England, like even if it's that, it'll still suggest yes. And that's a whole other thing, but this reminds me of that too, where like that kind of abbreviates nuances in the thinking, and it just abbreviates the wider like context in which you might think about the question, right? Like I bet if someone just came up to you and was like, say for the sake of argument, the person's like a native person and they're who lives in a tribe, in a tribal land, and they said, should we build a tribal land? So should we build data centers in our tribal land? Like, you're going to ask a ton of follow-up questions, and you might even say, let's go talk to your council about it, because you don't know, because I bet different tribes would have different organizations would have very different opinions on this, right? There's a whole context here, and things like chatbots and like ChatGPT like completely miss all this stuff, and I could see that making that kind of conversation a bit trickier, especially in a foreign language, or like an underrepresented language. By foreign, I actually meant for the chatbot, but underrepresented for the chatbot.
Yeah.
Or what do you think?
No, I absolutely agree. You're spot on. And yeah, like the nuance of conversations, I think is bulldozed when you're sending in really specific questions to like a big public, I guess, like corporate tool. And yeah, syncophancy is that kind of like line of inquiry around like, these chatbots. You can actually cue chatbots, like kind of like hack them to say like, drop the sycophantic tone and just give it to me straight, chatbot. And you can like jailbreak some of that behavior for at least a few conversational turns. But yeah, when we're thinking about this, I think that chatbots want you to continue using them. So some of that is engineered behavioral cues for humans, and I think without a lot of critical dialogue around it, we are very, very keen to fall for it. So as much as we can communicate, I feel like a lot of the AI conversation actually is around like, how can we get the humans to like believe in themselves? Like, no, please, let's think through this critically. You have the skills and the necessary knowledge to kind of like feel through this. If it feels off, it's off. But yeah.
Yeah, this makes sense. Speaking of the critical skills to think about whether it's off, one other thing I wanted to ask you about, you've done a lot of work thinking about how to teach AI to, I guess, different native peoples, and thinking about different like curriculum and stuff like this. I was wondering, I guess maybe starting this at a bit of a high level, like what is your approach to teaching AI specific to Native youth in the U.S.?
Yeah. I think with any, and I'm not like a learning scientist or like an educational researcher. This is just purely like vibes, for lack of a better word. But what I see is a really big intergenerational opportunity here to build community, starting from the classroom. I think that because of the pandemic, youth in schools are the ones that are using and bringing technology back into their homes, if it wasn't already there, like previous to. And I think that with that comes some interesting conversations, and even just like hypothetically speaking, like the pandemic, like a young person being at their grandparents' house and kind of like quarantining, helping out at home with them, having their Chromebook, and then trying to figure out some of these like tech questions. It becomes like the youth and the elders trying to figure this out together. So with that in mind, that's kind of how I approach training technology, or like the scientific discussion around computer science and designing tools and understanding them, is really leaning into this community-driven approach to bringing community in, both for the formal assessment of a project, but also like the design, and like answering questions that are actually useful to community. One project that I like to kind of talk about and show off is like Power Shazam. So this project is built with and explicitly like kind of like instructed to be built with open source or openly published music, and students are able to categorize it as they see fit. All music that's like on YouTube or whatever, and then this Power Shazam can come back and tell you, oh, this is in my example, I guess, exemplar. You can come back and say, oh, this is a northern song, this is a southern song. But these are all like kind of like knowledge nuances that communities have that Shazam doesn't necessarily have. Like I know I can't go to my Shazam and be like, what style drum is this when I'm sitting at a powwow. So building a tool that has like a little bit more specific knowledge to the context that we may need it is what I'm trying to kind of like build into the design flow of these tools. And then bringing in that intergenerational aspect of like, grandma, can you help me? Like what would be useful for you? This is what's possible. And then kind of helping to create conversational opportunities around like responsible design and like co-design of technology and community has been my approach.
Yeah, I mean, this makes sense. I will say, so as someone who's been a UX researcher for many years, I think the idea of viewing the use of the technology as a conversation between the two people can be very different. I mean, than maybe the classical way that UX researchers think about analyzing a product. So like often when a UX researcher is trying to look at things, they think about like the user as the user. Like the user has a need and they're doing something. So it's the individual using it, not two people using it in conversation. Because then I guess either depending on your perspective, the AI software becomes, if you're viewing it as a part of a conversation between a young adult and an older person, and an elder, we'll say, then it becomes, it either becomes a facilitator in that conversation. That's one way to view it. The other way is that it's a third point in that conversation, and then now it's a part of a three-way conversation between the young adult, the elder, and the AI. Or how does viewing it as like viewing usage of the product as two people using it, not an individual user, how does that influence how you approach the design?
Yeah, and I really like that question, because that wasn't how I was imagining it, but I can see exactly what you're saying. So in that case, I think that the tool is then like decentered in a way, and it becomes more about the first, like the dialogue you're having with the person next to you, and then like how you're both kind of like experiencing this tool. So I think it's like in that way it's a more indigenous tool than not, because I think, like you said, like we're trained in computer science and software design, UI UX, to think of like these hypothetical users, you come up with your personas and kind of drive the tool toward them, and it's always an individual. And you try to be as broad and also specific as possible as you're designing those things. But yeah, there's never like okay, we have like this intergenerational pair sitting down and using this tool in a really limited way. And I think that kind of creates opportunity to create limitations where they're expected, so that like in terms of data sovereignty and community, then like the elder and the young person can start to have more dialogue around like, oh, what is this tool? What do you like to do? What do you like about this? What makes this confusing for you? And it then becomes more of a science communication than just like a behavioral use case, which is really interesting. We should write a paper.
Oh, yeah. I have to admit, now my mind's now going on this. I'm also like, I'm like forming connections as what do you mean by science communication?
Yeah, I think that especially for computer science, there's this assumption that you have to be really, really good at math, and you have to be like super, super like driven in like technology and circuits and all sorts of things. And I think that like a curiosity is is good enough to get into computer science, and a lot of that drive to learn comes from like seeing what some of the problems are that computer scientists are working on. And so like from a science communication, like what is science communication in this context? It's really just breaking down like the complexities of like computational systems. Everybody for the most part has a phone or a computer or access to one or both of those, like in North America specifically. So like how these tools work is what I'm trying to kind of give youth the vocabulary to describe, but also create opportunities for everybody to explore kind of more hands-on. I think you can talk at people for days. Like I could talk for hours about formal methods. I don't know. I've had people talk to me about formal methods, and I still have lots of questions. It's very like abstract, especially if there's a lot happening in a computer that you don't really think about. So how we break those things down and create opportunities for people to identify more problems and get more people into computer science that think differently about like what the use of computers is and what that could look like. That's how things like kind of like flatten, and what creates opportunities for folks to engage in a more critical way. So science communication in the context of computer science and kind of like in that ed space is breaking down barriers to understanding and really supporting learners and people who are just generally curious in like guiding them toward like the questions they want to ask, because they're different than questions that I would see, especially when you get into classrooms. Youth are brilliant, and how they problem solve is going to be completely different. So like you said earlier, computation and the science around computation is going to be completely different in 10 years, and hopefully that's with a lot of young people, young Native people in the problem solving seat.
Yeah, this makes sense. I could definitely see. I mean, I could see everything you just said. So, like, ranging from, like, what you were talking about, people within computer science. My background in terms of, like, study was math, also anthropology, but my focus on the math. And math and computer science are both often conceived of, people will have a, like, I just can't do it conception. I'm just not able to. And there is a lot of like anthropological and sociological literature that says that like this is how people approach math and computer science and related fields that they, like with kids, if with parents, for example, if their kids struggle with reading, there are studies that will talk about like the parents will like sit down with them and coach them in reading. But if the kid struggles with math, and say elementary school kids, like very young kids, they are much more likely to just say, okay, he or she just can't do math. Like this, you're just not a math person. And they're much more, instead of kind of working through it with them. And it seems like kind of this built over time and, added with things like structural inequalities like racism and sexism and all this stuff, it leads to people just thinking that they can't do it. And computer science, also math, these are skills. And if you spend time exploring it, you will develop those skills. And anyone can develop them. It's not like certain people are good at it and certain people are just bad at it. Yeah. But at least in my mind, encouraging people to explore is probably the best way to develop the skill sets, and to do it in a positive and kind of interesting way that encourages them to like think, as opposed to just learn what the textbook says. Maybe that's particularly helpful in AI because the textbooks really haven't been written yet. There are a couple, but they're not really. It's too new. Yeah. What do you think? Like, how does this apply to, like, how do you specifically approach AI from a curiosity perspective?
Yeah, I like that question. I like to start with identifying problems. So like where I see some behavior in a system, or maybe have like an intuition about, oh, this probably won't perform well with X, Y, or Z. Finding ways to like immediately kind of like experiment and idea problem. And then, you come back and you build your research from that. Like you've identified a problem and then you kind of like build from there. That is where I guess like my approach comes in. I don't think I answered your question.
I asked it in an ambiguous way. What I meant to ask is, how do you approach like fostering curiosity in teaching AI? And then I think we're talking about how you do it yourself, which from how I phrased it before was a fine way to answer it. I realized I wasn't that specific in my phrasing.
Immediately as I was answering, I was like, wait a second, this isn't right. It's the same kind of thing. So like identifying problems, I think is like the researcher approach. So I can present the same problem to a group of like 50 people, and there's going to be 50 different approaches to A, like what the problem actually is, and then B, like the possible ways to solve that. And I really enjoy that, and I think that people really enjoy feeling like supported in exploring. I think it's our natural tendency to want to learn. It's like human nature is to be inquisitive. So when I'm working with community and understanding and helping folks understand like what AI is, what the possibilities are, what does this actually look like, I ask tons of questions. Like most of like a workshop will be more me asking questions and trying to understand and kind of like create pathways and like step-by-step approaches to problem solving. And I think that allowing communities to identify and kind of like feel through solutions like in that way is creating opportunity for like those folks that are like super inquisitive, like, okay, well, you could have a career in this, like come to computer science, get a PhD. I would never do that, but yeah, like come to computer science, like learn about this. We have a lot of problems over here. Then becomes the conversation for folks that are a little more hesitant around like AI and feel a little bit more like, oh, computers are just too complex. I think what I really enjoy is like sitting down and being like, no, it's really, if I can do it, you can do it. Like it's not that difficult. Like what questions do you have? And kind of like working backwards from that kind of like inhibition to exploring these tools and being like, oh, okay, well, here's how I would approach it, and giving some of those step-by-step approaches, and then coming back weeks, months, years later and saying, oh my gosh, like the conversation we had at that workshop, I decided to get into like software development. It was so much fun, like how we got to work through this like this workshop or this problem. Like it's coming back, and yeah, I really love what I'm doing now. So I think that when creating opportunities to learn, learning in like a safe way, in a way that's like really accessible, and in a way that actually like supports learning and doesn't kind of like demean, because I think there is like this air, and a lot of the marketing and the companies lean into that air of like, oh, we know better than you, like this is what AI is where I think a lot of that, like there's a perceived like elevation around what AI and technology do and are, and so breaking that down has really been my approach, and it's worked. It works. It seems like people respond to being in safe learning environments, which is good, and creating those where I can is kind of my approach.
There you go. That's awesome. I mean, this makes sense. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, it's on a bit of a different topic. You were talking about this at the wee beginning of our conversation, but you've done a lot of work also thinking about like bias within AI systems and kind of bias within the data collection process. But I wanted to ask you about maybe at a high level, like what are some of your biggest concerns for bias within AI systems, particularly in relation to Native communities in the U.S. or North America?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Concerns-wise, I think that we are very quick to trust technology systems and companies that they have our best interests in mind. Hopefully some of that is like changing, and I think that I think with like the data center conversation, that's bringing up a lot of this, like I guess like critical conversation around like what is actually happening here. One thing that I kind of always say, and lots of people say this, I feel bad saying it, I don't know who to attribute it to, but like if the product is free, you're the product, and having that mentality when you're using like any kind of free tool that you put your data into. So I'm concerned that there's a quick like implementation turnaround because of need, and we're not thinking through like what other possibilities and what other technological possibilities there could be. And then I'm also concerned that as we implement these tools, there's a little bit of a disconnect and like an inherent trust, even for some of the other research that I'm supporting here at KU. There's like an automatic assumption that, oh, if a computer's doing it, it's right. And we've had this conversation for years around Google, like if it's on Google, it's right. It's not. So how we're assessing tools and kind of like being critical about the outputs we're getting is also a concern of mine. And if we're implementing kind of like corporate tools or consumer tools that are just off the shelf, like how much you trust that output, especially in like LLM land. That is where a lot of my my concern goes to these days. And like, then, okay, how do we create guardrails that actually work? And how do we verify some of that so that we don't send people into like places that we don't want them to go, is kind of like where my work's at right currently. So yeah, the use and implementation of corporate tools is one big concern, and then subsequently the critical lens that we're looking at these tools and these outputs, and like just because it works doesn't mean it works well. And how do we understand what a good tool looks like, and what that means for us, is kind of like where a lot of the conversation I try to have in community is.
Yeah, I mean, this makes sense. I think in U.S. culture in particular, there can be a very strong emphasis on like good enough.
Yeah.
And the irony is that a lot of for a number of different functions, a number of different use cases, AI technology is good enough. But like, I think there's a lot that you sacrifice when you basically use a technology that's good enough that does even 90%, because there's actually a lot in that nuance in that 10% that we can lose in the process.
Yeah. I'll also add that like a lot of the like good enough is toward this like endless pursuit of AGI, or artificial general intelligence, or artificial like this everything tool, which I don't think is useful. Like I don't think that like it's the same kind of like ego trip drive to live on Mars. I don't think that that's what the majority of the people on Earth like need. And so how do we kind of like reel it back in and like make these things like actually useful? Like really specific use case is also kind of with that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. In other conversations, I have likened it to the quest for El Dorado, the quest for the lost cities of gold, or the fountain of youth, to use like a very colonial example, where like
no, but it fits.
yeah, where like the people like the Spanish, for these two is particularly the Spanish, they thought there's this lost city of gold, we have to go find it, the fountain of youth, we have to go find it, and it was just completely wrong. Those things do not exist. It was just completely fanciful. It was myth making, but at the same time, like the process of thinking about it, that it exists, caused the Spanish people to explore areas and colonize areas that like I don't know how history would have played out if they didn't have this conception, but at least it significantly shaped how colonialism manifested, because they now explored areas and then ended up conquering people that they wouldn't necessarily have, including, I believe, parts of what is now New Mexico. I thought some of the initial explorers on the Spanish side, this is long before it became a part of the United States, I thought they were looking for like the Fountain of Youth or the Lost City of Gold. I don't know. I don't remember in detail the history, but I thought that was the case.
Yeah. Actually, one fun fact that I keep in the back of my brain, in Santa Fe, there, like, at the time that like the Pilgrims were coming over at Plymouth, there was already a hotel or an inn established in Santa Fe, So I think, yeah, that timeline, historical timeline is a really interesting conversation to have, because yeah, that kind of area of North America, yeah, was colonized much earlier and in much different ways than, yeah, like I guess the U.S. textbook conversation around colonization, like what it discusses. So that's cool. Yeah.
There you go. I think I was looking at like the first hotels. This was a couple days ago. The first hotels to be started in the it phrased it as in the United States, but of course these hotels predate the existence of the United States. And it was like different parts of the Spanish colonies that are now in the United States. Like I don't know. I can't remember if the first was in was in Santa Fe, or if it was in somewhere like in what is now California. I think it was California, because I think they came along the coast before they went more inland. But I found it very interesting, and it reminded me of this, because I'm like, yeah, this stuff got like colonized like centuries before any of the British came over to the 13 colonies, or what became the 13 colonies. Taking a step back, because we could talk about that probably for a long time. I wanted to ask you about the data centers. So you've been kind of hinting at this in different ways, but like, what impact have some of the I already asked you about, like data centers that they're considering building, but the current data centers and the locations that they're being built on, what impact has that had on kind of nearby tribal communities or tribal lands and resource allocation and stuff like this?
Yeah, well, I think that since this is like currently happening, I don't know that I have like a concrete answer. But some of the questions it brings up for me, when we're talking about data centers, even just like downstream data centers, say in like a giant region like Phoenix, where water's coming from like all over the place, and yeah, resources are already kind of like constrained from like treaty rights, and also like compacts with the state and things like that. How our treaty rights long term are going to be affected, especially with regard to water rights. That's been a topic for a long time. The minerals underneath the riverbed, things like that, these are all explicitly called out, and also like I guess like interpreted upon in many cases, specifically in the Southwest, and that conversation has been going and contentious. So how is this going, this like kind of like new layer of complexity going to affect some of those promises? That's where one of my questions is. And then also, like, if we're looking to create data centers like on tribal lands for ourselves, what does that jurisdiction look like? What are other alternatives to water? I'm not super familiar with some of the engineering behind it, but there are ways to avoid using water, like fresh water specifically, to kind of like perpetually cool these monstrosities. And so how we're looking into some of the alternatives, and factoring that into cost benefit analysis, when we're looking to do these things within either like in partnership with other tribes, or as we're looking to partner with companies that do these things and kind of like lease our land. Yeah, I think those are all things that we can contribute and create different conversations around, or different outcomes around, in some of those analyses. But for the most part, like, okay, now that we have this machine sucking all of this water out, like what do our treaty rights look like for time immemorial? Like, that's just shortened to a very finite amount a finite timeline when we're talking through data center use and development. So yeah, I don't know that communities know yet. I don't think anybody really knows yet. I know there are lots of different approaches to powering these centers. Here in Kansas, they just started, I think, in January, maybe, and then by July, it'll reach criticality. But there's a new nuclear project where they're burying, I want to say like a mile down, like water reactors, water nuclear reactors, and we're the pilot site for one company, and that those reactors will power for, I think, like 8 years or something like that, data centers. So that's something that's happening. There obviously, like, there's lots of stats and kind of like misattributed stats in some way to like one query is one bottle of water. I think it's a little bit more complex than that. But what we're looking at for like energy, and it's becoming much more urgent, I think, like energy use and what we're developing around alternatives for like cleaner energy, not coal, not like all the electricity that goes into keeping these computers online sucks a lot. So I think those are some of the questions that I have at this point around like data centers and use and development and governance and what that future looks like. On the other side, I think that like most communities, if they want to get into AI or if they want to find ways to use tools, you don't necessarily need a data center to do a lot of what most people need AI for. Like you can run models on really micro tools that work just as well as some of the corporate tools that we've become accustomed to. So providing opportunities to explore those possibilities is also kind of like part of the conversation now too.
Yeah, this makes sense. I do think this seems like a very evolving thing, and like especially in a place like the Southwest, water disputes have been it's been a highly contentious topic for a very long time, for decades or for centuries. It seems like this is just kind of it just kind of adds to the already complex conversation. And same with kind of other resources in that region. But I would love to both see technology that like developed that could run these data centers without having to use water or without having to use like an incredibly high amount of water. I would also like, and this might the other thing I was thinking about might hint at what you're saying about like if a lot of the energy is going towards AGI, but like a lot of the actual useful technology seems to be not this kind of holy grail or fountain of youth that like it seems to be much more mundane AI technology that like actual people use, and that stuff doesn't seem to use as much energy. It doesn't seem as intensive.
Yeah, and I think that because we're so heavily marketed, especially in the U.S., and there aren't necessarily like consumer protections around these technologies, we see only one possibility. Whereas this research has been around for decades, so creating opportunities to explore micro technology, because this bubble will burst, and like that's just kind of like the nature of the market. We're going to have to like figure out, okay, like now that like the shine has worn off, like what can we actually do with this? And there are lots of things and lots of useful, I guess, like use cases for AI and what micro technology looks like. So Yeah, and it's a lot easier to secure potentially, but also like to keep sovereign and like on tribal land for our own use cases, and make sure that everything's kind of like contained. So yeah, I think that Indigenous folks and tribal communities are, although we've been left out of like the larger, more mainstream conversation, I think we have a big opportunity for envisioning an alternative to like what's currently happening, and really realizing that alternative as well. Yeah.
This makes sense. I guess maybe like you, I'm optimistic. I might be a little more cautiously optimistic, but I do think that I do hope that this is the case. I could see the technologies actually driving more, like what you said, more local uses. And the big global things like AGI, I think will probably remain a holy grail. They'll just remain the thing that everyone's pursuing but never finds. Well, yeah, thanks for taking the time. My final question for you is, for anyone interested in learning more about your work, where would you recommend they go?
Yeah, you can go to chamisaedmo.com, just my first and last name. Also, always happy to connect on LinkedIn. I think maybe we can put my email in the description or something like that. But yeah, I'm happy to connect with anybody that's interested in computer science research, specifically in AI and data sovereignty, Indigenous data sovereignty. And yeah, anybody that has questions or is curious or are working through problems in community that is kind of at like a stalling point and need a little bit more support, I'm happy to help always. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and I'll try to include all that stuff below. I guess I hope you have a good rest of your morning.
Thanks. This was awesome. This was fun. Cool questions.